we're ready to get started. So I'm going to introduce you to Erik here. He's a self-described web components nut. I read that on your LinkedIn earlier today. So yeah, he hosts this podcast, the Web Platform Podcast, and I was looking at the most recent episode actually, and it's on testing front-end code. So if you liked the testing talk earlier that Justin gave, you might be interested in listening to this podcast. I think
there was quite a lot we all learned.
Yes, yes, that's good. It's always good to learn things. Yeah, so Erik, take it away.
As was introduced. So big turnout. We sold out. That's pretty awesome. Props to you guys. Going after Nico, I actually asked him to trip on his way up so that I would be okay, as far as going after him. So he could do a little bad for me this time. So JavaScript Rehab for Grunters and Gulpers. It's kind of a weird thing. This is not a talk about Gulp or Grunt, like one versus the other or anything like that. This is more of like my observations as a front-end developer, going through from, circa like 2003, doing web development to now, and how it's changed, and what we've done, what it's become, and how we can optimize that, and kind of build ourselves like a nice, workable environment. And so, take this with a grain of salt as we go through. So it used to be, you have like a text editor, like TextPad. If anybody remembers that? Windows. Woohoo! Love that thing. It's like the only thing that had plugins at the time. And we had HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, all these static files. You just wrote them straight out, and they were inside the browser, and woohoo, you're ready to go. And all the back-end people were like, it's not programming, dude. They're like, but it looks pretty. It looks really pretty. Just a little JavaScript, and applets. Use applets. That's it. And so today, it's changed a little bit. A little bit. So, I don't know if you guys have seen this. This was, as of 2011, the website for George R.R. Martin. It had little GIFs that just sort of, or GIFs, whatever you want to pronounce it, just spinning around, and it made me think of the good old days with table layouts and good stuff. So, that's where we were, and that was the state of things back then, and that's kind of what was exciting was you can just build stuff and it's there. And today, it's a little bit different. So we're kind of overwhelmed with a lot of these things. I think that if I got into front-end development today, I would be totally like, where do I start? What do I do? There's all these pieces, Bower, web components, Angular, JavaScript, Aurelia, all these pieces to put together. And it can be overwhelming. So to kind of go through, how did this happen? I don't know if you guys are, I started out as a designer, and I quickly realized that I was not really meant to be a designer, but it was a lot of fun along the way. I still have a really good passion for understanding the usability of things, though. And the expectations from clients, from users now, is just phenomenally different than it was back in, say, 2005. Before we had Ajax. Ajax came along, Microsoft, IE6, woohoo! You guys remember that? Oh yeah, that was like the best browser back then. That was like the beginnings of Ajax. They basically created it, and then Mozilla took over and said, oh, let's build this as a spec, and that changed the way we looked at everything. And then we had, in 2009, Ryan Dahl. We know what he did, Node.js. So then those back-end developers that were saying to me, it's not programming. They're like, oh, whoa, wait, what? It's not a toy? I can actually build stuff with this? And so what's happened to us because of these expectations, we've had some problems. So we're getting complex. We're getting a lot of expectations to excess, and we're just shoving everything we possibly can in to make things work. That does look like a good burger, though. So, as far as tasks and things like that, because I talked about build systems seem to be a big thing, builds and tasks. So dealing with tools like Grunt and Gulp, you need NPM. And so when you're dealing with these, you're thinking, if you come from anybody Ruby developers at all? So Rake was the first one of these that I actually used. Rake is a tool similar to Gulp or Grunt. And that's written in Ruby. And that was pretty exciting for me. I'd never done anything like that. And then when I worked with these, I was like, this is amazing. So I tried to do everything inside of those. If any of you have built like manual things before I learned Rake, I was using Ant, right? To do manual stuff, putting it together. And like Nicholas said before, you know, building sprites manually. Yeah, I was that guy, Nicholas. Yeah, it wasn't fun. It wasn't fun at all. So these automated tools, they really helped out a lot. So it started me thinking, as I've gone through and used them over and over again on each project, I was on a hackathon with some friends doing DivShot, which just got recently acquired. They do Static Showdown. You guys heard of that one? Google's going to still do it, so I'm excited. But it's basically a hackathon for static applications. And so that was really exciting, and I used the Angular Yeoman, so Angular, and it built out this whole build system, all these tasks. I didn't know half of them. I was like, what am I doing here? So when stuff broke, I didn't know what to do. So it started me to think like, okay, well, NPM you definitely need. So I've gotten used to the command line. When I started using the command line, I was pretty fearful of using it. I don't know if anybody came from the design world, but when you look at that black box and the blinking cursor, that can be a little scary, right? And so I'm used to it now. I don't want to use like source tree for Git or anything like that if I can help it. I really love the command line. And so it started me thinking, well, I can just use NPM. I don't need Gulp, I don't need Grunt, I don't need any of these things. And so the different ways to do this, like if you look at your package JSON from Node, that's the configuration file for Node for those that don't know, right? You can have this scripts key, and inside that scripts key you can have just whatever you want to put on the command line. So you can do like Sass, or something you want to call directly from the command line. I have an example here with serve, which is a NPM module. And so this would basically run a Connect server, right? You just put that out there. This is great, but if you're working with continuous integration and development, you got to make sure you're not like on, dare I say it, Windows. Because Windows is actually getting a lot better, especially Edge. Edge is a really great browser, but the command line is still really lacking. So there's nothing like the Unix commands that we have now. You can use Cygwin and all that, but then you have to manually set that up on your servers, and so I was like, well, I can't just use NPM. So if you're using Gulp or Grunt, for those of you that are not familiar, Gulp is basically you write node code to do these tasks and to run these things. And Gulp is like, you give it a configuration like jQuery. You would just give a configuration object and say, okay, just do these things. And either way is fine. Grunt has been around a lot longer. The performance from Gulp that I've been able to get has been a lot better, but I know the guys at Ember use Grunts a lot with Broccoli. I don't know if they still use it now that they have Glimmer and all that, but I mean, they're still both viable choices. You still need a little of this sprinkled in if you want some good task management. So I am really guilty of this, making tasks really, really complex. And I have a little XKCD thing there. I don't know if you guys can read it. It's pretty small, but basically it's like you spend a lot of time on a task, and you're writing a program that's going to automate it. And so you have this idea of, I'm going to save so much time, and then you actually don't save a lot of time because you keep ongoingly trying to put this together, and it's really frustrating. So if you can take things that are already there, what is that? Oh my God. If you can take things that are already there and use that, that's going to be to your advantage. And something like this is really clean to me and really easy to read. So you have a Gulp task called serve, you run this function, and then it runs these things in sequence, these other tasks. And that's really easy to read, really easy to follow, rather than having a bunch of code everywhere, you're going back and forth. So keep your stuff like up on top of your file that you're going to actually use, and all the private stuff and the things that maybe you're just like all your logic, put that underneath. You don't really need to use that as much. So this is something that How many people feel the same? Okay, we are in the minority apparently. But I'll tell you why I put this up here. Is that Bower is great. I think it's a good tool for certain things, but and the best thing about it is that it has this flattened tree. And previously, NPM hasn't really been able to do this. If you guys have used NPM, it doesn't really do this. Now, NPM 3 does this a lot better. It's much more optimized and it's very stable, so if you haven't upgraded, I definitely recommend upgrading to that. But what I found was, why do I need Bower and why do I need NPM together? There's just no, it doesn't make sense to me because I can do the same things. But then you start to look at what's actually in Bower and what's actually in NPM, and you're like, well, nothing's registered that I really need, especially dealing with stuff like, since I work with web components a lot, I'm working with Polymer. So Polymer has certain structure to all its files. And NPM can't handle this yet. So we're still locked into Bower. We're still locked into this because it does the flattened tree for us, and we can get the caching of the Polymer library from each component. So we can't do this with NPM yet, but it does solve most problems. So if you're not using some structure similar to the Polymer components, you can pretty much eliminate Bower and use just NPM for these things. So the question might be, well, okay, I'm getting rid of Bower. I have stuff like Angular I need to put in the browser. My node modules is not necessarily going to be in my distributed app. What are some alternatives that I can use? Okay, so Nico talked a little bit about Browserify, or Browserify, I don't know how you really should pronounce it. But I had asked him and Axel Rashmeyer to give me like some information about Browserify and Webpack, and I started playing with these two. And I found that Browserify is really awesome. It was one of the first of these module systems that would take your node modules basically and allow you to use it in the browser. So it would load it asynchronously, which is great. You can have cache these things that way. And Browserify has so many different ways you can implement it. And if you're a node developer, it's really easy to use. It's been around a long time, but it seems to be, a lot of people have said that it's an older way to do it, and I haven't seen that. It's not, people have said, well, I don't use that because there's newer ways, better ways to do this, and I don't really agree with that, but if you guys try it out for yourself, definitely. I found that Webpack was really good, except it requires so much configuration. Webpack works really good for Polymer if you configure it right, but you get higher performance, I've found, but you need to do a lot of different configuration and tweak it and get it better to really make it work. The two that I haven't tried as much for this alternative to using Bower is JSPM and SteelJS. I just started to. Julia actually introduced me to SteelJS, which is great, thank you. SteelJS basically optimizes your modules so that instead of, let me start from the beginning. Okay. So you have modules. Let's say you're using Browserify, or you're using Browserify with Babel or something to make these modules turn into a file. That file is going to be one large file. And so you may or may not need this critical stuff that's in there, but it's going to be one file. So it's going to have a longer load time. So what SteelJS does is you can take these, load them asynchronously, optimize bundles based on how much they're used on certain pages, and you can cache them. And it handles this really well. I haven't tested this in large applications for production, but it works very well for like medium size. So definitely check that out. JSPM, so far, I've found that it's good for prototypes and proof of concepts because out of all of these, it's probably the simplest to use. 1, 2, 3, you're up and running with like no configuration. So you can pretty much do good stuff for smaller applications, but once you start to scale a little, that starts to get a little painful from what I've seen, but I haven't, again, tested that fully to the extent I want to. You guys with me so far? Okay, sweet. So, like I said, I was in this hackathon for static applications, and we used a generator called Yeoman. And Yeoman, Angular they have one for Angular. So what that does is you run you run yo Angular, and in your command line, it asks you a bunch of questions. So do you want Gulp? Do you want Grunt? Do you want to do this? Do you want SAS? Do you want less? Okay, fine. I'm going to spit out an app for you. It writes it for you. And so that's really useful. Slush is another one of these that came out after Yeoman. It's not as well known, but it's still very good. But since there's so many different things for Yeoman, I still use it. And Yeoman now supports Gulp, so the performance is just as good as Slush now. And there's also static app generators. I work on, not lately, but I've worked a lot on webcomponents.org, and we've been using .pad, which is a really great static site generator if you guys have used it. It is older than something like Metalsmith, which is more modern, but the thing that's great about that is if you're building content sites, you can get up and running really fast and have people just submit content through like markup files and things like that. Static site generators are really, really great, and there's a lot of good JavaScript ones out there. So this is what happened when I tried to run my generator for Angular. And it's hard to read, but basically I installed everything as it said, and then I find out, ow, there's something breaks. I'm having some error happen at this page, and that might be because my node version has a problem. It might be because some modules are not updated. It might be for a lot of different reasons. And this is the frustrating thing about some of these generators, because they work great, and then you can initially create stuff really fast, but you really need to look at what it's actually building and see, like, okay, well, I'm running this task. Why am I running this task? What's going on in here? Because a lot of the errors that people put into their modules, and this is not to say the whole community at large, but there's some where there's not a lot of good error handling. So you won't be able to debug as well. And so then you have to kind of, sit through everything and try and figure it out, which is fun. Super fun. So I think this was kind of a no-brainer. How many people hate testing JavaScript? Okay, don't kill me. So I actually find I write a lot better code when I test JavaScript and use it as a way to design. So meaning I would write the tests and then see basically TDD, where you see it work, see it fail, and then keep going back and forth. And I don't get to do that as much as I like at a lot of jobs because it's not sold well to a lot of places. So definitely include this in your estimates and put that in there. There's lots of tools for it. I won't go into them because there's so many, and I'm sure Justin Searles probably went through them all, and I missed his talk, and I feel bad. But it's something that really helps. And when we were doing JavaScript development in 2005, this was unheard of. We would never try to do this. It wasn't until Node came about that we were like, wait a minute, we need to really think about how we're working with this code. So one of the things I started using recently was transpilers. And how many people here have used CoffeeScript in the past? How many people here love CoffeeScript? Okay. I am not a fan anymore. I don't understand, because it's just basically syntax to me. It does compile down to ES3, which is great if I'm supporting IE7 again. So that's great. Or if I'm doing a specific type of app. And CoffeeScript has its uses, but for me, I'm just not a fan. I think that I didn't want to try TypeScript, but then I was working with some .NET developers and they wanted to put it into a project. And I was like, oh, right. TypeScript is actually really good if anybody's used it. And what I like about it is that it's the same syntax as ES6. So it's like, okay, I'm basically using ES6, but it has these extras in it. And you can use them or not use them. And some people, that upsets them. I need it to be always on or always off. But I love the flexibility, and that's why I love JavaScript, is that you can do so much with it. You can bend it to your will. And you can't do that with Java. You can't do that with these statically typed languages. So TypeScript was really good. Babel I like even more. And now Babel 6 came out, and there's a whole bunch more stuff you can do that I haven't really looked at even, but I'm kind of excited for that. But I found too, some people will have linting and they'll have transpiling. And I can see that in some cases, but for the most part, transpilers will break if it's not correct syntax. So you don't need both. And that's why I kind of put these two together. So for me, usually I'll go through a project and I'll figure out which I want to do. So if the team is not used to, they don't need to learn the newer syntaxes or use ES6, that's fine. I will always push for it though, because I don't consider it cutting edge anymore. It's kind of what we should do most of the time. There are some apps we shouldn't, but most of the time. But we could just link code instead, and that would be just as good, I think, for those people. So this goes for all languages, I guess. Anyone not know what monkey patching is? Okay, so I'll give you a story. I used to work at a company and we had Highcharts library. It's a charting library in JavaScript. And the Highcharts team is really active and they'll respond to you very quickly if you have questions. But we were not allowed to commit to the project or to do pull requests. So we basically had to have our own fork of it, more or less. But it wasn't a real fork, it was just a copy. And so we'd have inline edits and comments inside that. And then, a few iterations later, we have to upgrade Highcharts and a dependency for Highcharts. How many people have ever had to do something like that? How fun is it? Oh my god. I think we spent the whole sprint just trying to go through that code. So there were so many little tiny fixes and things. jQuery plugins we did this with too, because the registry didn't have everything, and so you find these random, jQuery tree was a really hard one to find a good tree at the time. And so you had to actually go in and change it. Nothing was publicly accessible API. You have to go into the private pieces of it, play around with it. Just vendorize your code, as they say, keep it separate. Pull it in through, modules or Bower if you really want to. And leave it alone. Do pull requests if you can, and push that to your product and services managers. It's painful. So one of the last things I wanted to go through that I've been kind of working with teams to try and get together is I was on a couple of projects where we used Vagrant, and Vagrant is a developer tool built in Ruby, so not JavaScript, but it was really cool because it has a development environment, so you do a Vagrant file configuration, and try not to have too many of these dot files in there, that's another thing, but that's not JavaScript related. But Vagrant basically used VirtualBox or whatever virtual machine you had, and it built on top of that. What was really great about that was I've been on so many projects where we had problems with node versions and NPM because people weren't using Node Version Manager or anything like that. So it would be things were breaking when they were trying to onboard. And that was really frustrating. And once you start using Vagrant and pulling that up, it puts everything in this little development box, which was really nice. And you can open up your virtual machines and hit a URL on there, and it just works. And it's great for cross-browser testing too. So Vagrant is sort of going deprecated soon. So the successor to this will be Auto, which is this little thing here. And Auto is going to handle pretty much everything that Vagrant has, but more. It's going to handle deployment and everything. And the thing about Vagrant is there is a lot of configuration you have to do. But with Auto will take a look at your application and say, oh, that's a Node.js application. I'm going to build a whole environment for that for you. Bam, done. Oh, you want to deploy to here? No problem. I'm going to set that up for you. So it does a lot of this all by itself. And right now it's not in production level, but I think that's one of the next things. And of course, if you need a big hammer, you can use containers like Docker, which is great. One of my friends, Justin Rivero, he uses this for so many different projects, and he's always pushing this to me. He's the one who always says this. When you need to do crazy stuff, just pull in Docker. And it's really true for deployment. And that's pretty much it. So definitely check out my podcasts. I do Read the Source also, which is basically live code where you go through different libraries. Like we went through Falcor this week with Michael Paulson from the Netflix team. And so it was really cool to see how they built that code and worked out. So you'll find that at read the source.net.